thousands of anti-government protesters. After 16 people were killed and hundreds wounded, last night soldiers surrounded the presidential palace.
At the White House, the spokesman of President Bush rubber-stamped the story.
Let me share with you the administration's thoughts about what's taking place in Venezuela. We know that the action encouraged by the Chávez government provoked this crisis. The Chávez government suppressed peaceful demonstrations, fired on unarmed, peaceful protesters, resulting in 10 killed and 100 wounded. That is what took place, and a transitional civilian government has been installed.
Back in Venezuela, 3 years of modest democratic reform had been overturned.
Afortunadamente tenemos una gran arma, que son los medios de comunicación. Si ustedes, el pueblo venezolano vio hoy, el ejército ni la Fuerza Armada hizo un disparo. Todo esto fue nuestras armas fueron los medios de comunicación.
The plotters and their friends had everything to celebrate, or so they thought. The next morning, distraught people began phoning one of the independent radio stations still broadcasting.
Que tanto nos ha costado a los venezolanos. Me duele el alma por mi hijo, por mi hija, por los nietos, por toda esta juventud que va a quedar a la deriva de nuevo, en las manos de los arecos y los copellanos corruptos que llevaron a este país al caos total, sin moral.
Se fue la esperanza de un pueblo, se fue la Constitución. Se fue la democracia, se fue la esperanza de los niños.
But hope had not gone. The truth began to emerge that the resignation of Hugo Chávez had been faked. His wife, Maria, confirmed this in a call to the radio station.
Me dijo, aún después de muerto, quiero que logres que los organismos internacionales le hagan una prueba de grafología a esa firma, si es que existe, porque yo nunca firmé eso.
And the people in the barrios started to fight back. Down from the shanties they came to rescue their president.
The farther you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can deny me, you can decide to turn your face away.
Dictadura, queremos a Chávez. Chávez es el presidente de Venezuela y el pueblo lo ama y lo vamos a defender.
No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, though you're doing me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone. Oh no, something inside so strong.
Hundreds of thousands surrounded the palace, demanding the return of Chávez. Faced by such people power, the army turned.
Es que, desde el punto de vista militar, toda la Fuerza Armada, el 98% de la Fuerza Armada en todo el país, ha reafirmado, ha reiterado su lealtad a la Constitución vigente en Venezuela, a la Constitución de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela.
Roared on by huge crowds, the Presidential Guard, who had gone into hiding, retook the palace, and the plotters fled.
Los muchachos, los policías militares que estaban dentro de Miraflores, empezaron a levantar la bandera. Eso también nos dio más fuerza todavía a que no estábamos solos. Y ahí nos quedamos hasta que empezó a venir un helicóptero. Venía un helicóptero a medianoche que llegó a Miraflores y ahí sabíamos que venía Chávez. Eso fueron una hora de gloria para nosotros en vez que llegaba.
Just 48 hours after being kidnapped, Chávez was back in power.
Creo que la prueba suprema fue el golpe de Estado de abril 2002. Fui hecho prisionero, me llevaron pensé que iba a morir. Ahora el pueblo venezolano, los pobres, sin armas, se fueron por cientos de miles a las calles, por millones, a pedir por mi vida y a pedir que vuelva Chávez. Entonces a mí no me queda más nada, después de eso sobre todo, que dedicarle todo lo que me quede de vida a ese pueblo, sobre todo a los más necesitados, sobre todo a los más pobres.
As ordinary Venezuelans celebrated the defense of their democracy, some of the leading plotters fled to Miami, and within days it was clear that Washington had cast its shadow over the failed coup. The Bush administration had gone along with the lies of the plotters.
We know that the action encouraged by the Chávez government provoked this crisis.
As these CIA documents show, it was fully warned and knew all about their conspiracy. Washington claims that it warned Chávez about the coup. This is denied by the Venezuelan government. Washington not only knew what was going on, it was backing and funding the coup indirectly. Documents recently released show that the Bush administration channeled millions of dollars to the Venezuelan opposition in the months leading up to the coup. The money was handed out by its principal aid agency, USAID, and an organization called the National Endowment for Democracy.
During the 6-month period prior to the coup in April 2002, the U.S. government invested more than $2 million into financing these organizations that they knew at least 6 months before were planning to overthrow the government.
You're essentially saying post hoc ergo propter hoc, because it happened.
What was that again? I don't think our viewers will understand that. If you could translate that.
Just because it happened after we provided support to these groups doesn't mean that it happened because we provided support to these groups. Yeah. It is a logical fallacy. Right. We would be very open and transparent about what kind of support we provided through the National Endowment for Democracy and other institutions.
In fact, the National Endowment for Democracy handed out money to groups whose leaders were given cabinet positions in the short-lived illegal regime. An official in Washington explained that this was merely part of President Bush's freedom agenda.
But I want to just be very explicit about this, because there is, I think it's very important, and it's in the interest of fairness, to understand that the United States did not support that coup.
President Bush has promised to rid the world of evil and to lead the great mission to build free societies on every continent. To understand such an epic lie is to understand history, hidden history, suppressed history, history that explains why we in the West know a lot about the crimes of others, but almost nothing about our own. The missing word is empire. The existence of an American empire is rarely acknowledged, or it's smothered in displays of jingoism that celebrate war, and an arrogance that says no country has a right to go its own way unless that way coincides with the interests of the United States. For empires have nothing to do with freedom. They're vicious. They're about conquest and theft and control and secrets. Since 1945, the United States has attempted to overthrow 50 governments, many of them democracies. In the process, 30 countries have been attacked and bombed, causing the loss of countless lives. In my lifetime, the following countries in Latin America have been assaulted by the United States, directly and indirectly, their governments replaced by dictators and other pro-Washington leaders. One of the first to be attacked was Guatemala, one of the small countries of Central America, known dismissively as banana republics.
This is Guatemala City as seen from the air. People who live in the city dress very much like the people in our own southern states. There are many churches and people go to church regularly. They speak Spanish, of course, as most of them are of Spanish descent.
In fact, most of the people of Guatemala are not of Spanish descent. They're indigenous Mayan people and very poor. In the 1950s, 2% of the population of Guatemala controlled the natural wealth in collusion with giant US corporations like the United Fruit Company, which dominated banana growing. On the board of United Fruit was John Foster Dulles, who happened to be US Secretary of State. His brother Alan happened to run the CIA. Both were Christian fundamentalists who regarded any opposition as the work of communism and the devil. In 1950, this man, Jacobo Arbenz, became the first Guatemalan leader to be democratically elected by a majority of his people, who saw in him the hope of social justice. He was the Hugo Chávez of his day.
What was going on in Guatemala is that there was a democratically elected president in 1950, Jacobo Arbenz, who sought to institute a series of New Deal-style reforms in which the state had a greater role in both developing the economy and redistributing wealth. And the centerpiece of that was a land reform.
Arbenz was far from radical. His land reform policies were modest. But Washington was having none of it. Howard Hunt was then working for Alan Dulles' CIA.
So they said a decision has been made at the highest levels of our government to rid Guatemala of the Arbenz regime, and we would like you to participate in it. You will be the chief of propaganda and political action.
In Guatemala, what the CIA did was mobilize every facet of American power. It didn't just isolate Guatemala militarily and diplomatically, but it used the techniques of social psychology in a nearly year-long campaign which created a sense of crisis in Guatemala.
What we wanted to do was have a terror campaign to terrify Arbenz particularly, terrify his troops, much as the German Stuka bombers terrified the population of Holland, Belgium, and Poland at the onset of World War II.
And that's what they did, so that the United States could control the economy of Guatemala, destroying the dreams of its people.
We sowed confusion through the countryside, and of course by this time we had aircraft flying over and dropping leaflets and doing a little harmless bombing.
A little harmless bombing and a CIA terror campaign cost thousands of lives. Arbenz, the Democrat now branded a communist, was humiliated, stripped naked, and photographed before being forced into exile. Richard Nixon, then Vice President of the United States, flew in to congratulate the new dictators.
That Guatemala is going to enter a new era in which there will be prosperity for the people together with liberty for the people.
General Rios Montt was to be one of Washington's faces of liberty. During his time as president in the 1980s, thousands of people were murdered by death squads, most of them indigenous men, women, and children. His guns and helicopters came from the United States. President Reagan flew in to warmly endorse the general, whom he described as a man of great personal integrity.
In the CIA, we didn't give a hoot about democracy. I mean, it was fine if a government was elected and would cooperate with us, but if it didn't, then democracy didn't mean a thing to us. And I don't think it means a thing today.
The crushing of Guatemala was Washington.